Thank you, Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, honourable members of Parliament. Well, in the past few years, I think the European Union has made great strides to bring our national migration policy actually up to a European standard. The Pact on Migration and Asylum is actually a proof of what can be achieved with dialogue, with persistence, and also with a sort of pragmatism, I would say. And I assure you I will take the same open, persistent, and as I said, pragmatic approach to the implementation of the Pact. In fact, we are already off to a very good start, I would say. But there is, of course, one important area of migration policy which has not yet been fixed. That's the rules on the return of third country nationals who have no right to stay in the European Union. Right now, at the moment, we have the figures. 4 out of 5 people subject to a return decision do not actually leave the European Union, and frankly speaking, this is just not acceptable. Not acceptable for me, not acceptable, I think, for almost all people of the European Union. And it also, in a way, it also undermines our credibility as a European Union. It wastes the resources we have, the resources of our authorities also, and these resources should be devoting to those with a genuine right to stay within the European Union. And it also damages, in a way, the trust, people's trust in Europe's ability to manage the migration in an effective way. And worst of all, actually, it's the false message which is sent by that if you manage to get into the European Union, you will be able to stay, and that actually creates business opportunities for smugglers, for migrant smugglers, who exploit people and place their lives at risk. And therefore, I will today and in the next weeks to come, of course, ask you to take a significant step in completing migration reform for Europe to fix the problems and bring the returns system up to the same high standards as we have achieved under the Pact for Migration and Asylum. The rules we have today are simply not fit for the job, I would say. National systems, the national systems of returns are too fragmented. This creates enforcement gaps also, allowing people subject to return decisions in one member state to slip through the cracks and start with the whole process again in a country which is maybe next door, and that is also not acceptable. In a union, in a European Union with 27 member states, we need a common system for returns. One that makes clear that when someone is told to leave any member state under this system, they are being told to leave the entire European Union. That must be actually pretty obvious, and the entire European Union will have the tools needed to make that happen. And I'm therefore proposing to create a new European return order. When one member state issues a return decision, they will fill out a common, a standard form and share this through the common Schengen Information System database. There will be no more loopholes in that respect. And member states will be able to mutually recognize and also directly enforce orders issued by another member state without having to start another national procedure from scratch and all over again. Another problem we have right now is that the rights and obligations for returnees are not always clear. This creates confusion. It can also cause further procedural delays. And under the proposal I'm presenting today, this will change. We are codifying the rights people have when subject to a process, subject to a return process, such as, of course, the right of information, the right to appeal, the right also to return counseling. That is also in this proposal. And the same high standards as under the Pact will also apply for the returnees. For example, the right to free legal assistance and representation for appeals, and as well as an independent monitoring mechanism in every member state to ensure forced returns are carried out in full respect, of course, of fundamental rights. But with rights, there are also obligations, on the other hand. And for the first time, these two will be codified at EU level. Returnees will have a legal obligation to cooperate with the authorities, for example, by remaining in the country, by providing authorities with the right information and other things like not destroying documents, for instance. And when those obligations are not complied with, there will be consequences. People who do not cooperate or who represent a flight risk can be detained pending their return. I think effective returns are also, and effective return rules are also a matter of our security within the European Union. People who pose a threat, a security threat, cannot be allowed to remain free on our streets with the potential to harm others. And our new rules on return will therefore set out a series of measures to protect against those security risks. To start with, we will clearly define exactly what security risks means actually, and then a security check will be carried out early in the return process. So when someone poses a threat, they will be detained and subject to a forced return procedure. When they do leave, they will be banned also from returning for up to 20 years. Because I think security is such a fundamental right, and to protect that, to protect security, we must be uncompromising. These problems, of course, all relate to the internal dimension we are talking about today, the internal dimension of our returns policy. Of course, that is only, I would say, one side of the coin. The legislation I'm presenting today only addresses the internal dimension, of course, but in parallel, it is also clear that we need to step up our efforts also for migration diplomacy, I would say, with third countries. We need to build strong partnerships to also address the root causes of migration, improve cooperation on readmission also, and also open up legal pathways. That is also something which is very important. We need also to work on security cooperation, to clamp down on smugglers and traffickers, and I will pursue this work relentlessly over the course of the next years, over the course of my mandate. But even on our side of the process, actually, there are things we need to do to smooth the path also for readmission. Every time a return order is issued, a request for readmission will have to follow automatically. That's also within the new proposal. Also by actually facilitating the transfer of data from the EU member state to the third country. And finally, we are setting out the legal framework also for member states to work with third countries on new ideas like return hubs. Such forms of cooperation will, of course, and I stress that as well, will only be possible with countries that respect human rights and also the principle of non-refoulement, and have and there are safeguards there as well, including a mechanism for monitoring its implementation and a blanket exclusion actually for unaccompanied minors and families with minors. So, dear honourable members, the new rules, I think, will make clear that when you are ordered to leave the European Union, you will leave the European Union, either forcibly or voluntarily, if the conditions allow. And the fact that this is not the case today is a threat, I would say, to our credibility also as a European Union, to our unity also, and also to the sustainability of our migration system altogether. And I look forward to engaging in a hopefully constructive way, and I'm sure it's going to be constructive, in constructive negotiations also with you in this House and with the Member States in the Council, of course, as well, to bring these rules into effect. I hope we can be fast as well. That is also something which is very important because we have no time to lose. If we want to regain the trust of the European Union citizens also in our migration policies, I think they need to see swift action, especially on returns and on migration in general. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. I will now call the members who are speaking for the groups, starting with Mr. Tobe for EPP. You have 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. The Migration Pact was a crucial step in taking back control of Europe's external border and also creating a framework for a more European common approach on migration. And I would like to thank the constructive political groups in this House who actually made that happen the last mandate. Extremely important. But one major thing still remains, and that is returns. Too many people without the right to stay in Europe are still in Europe. And I would say it's quite hard to actually find member states across Europe that are effective in their work, that a no actually means a no. So the EPP, we have been calling for this proposal, and we welcome it, because we cannot have a system where people that are denied asylum can simply move to another member state to avoid being returned. There must be clear rules, firm obligation, and real consequences for non-compliance. I think this proposal in general creates now the common framework that we need. It closes many of the loopholes, and it put forward also a legal framework for return hubs. These are key messages that ensure that the people that do not have the right to stay in Europe also must leave Europe. But this is only a starting point. Negotiations must make this proposal as strong and effective as possible. Our system demands results, and I think that wishful thinking, those days are over. Now we need a policy that is in contact with reality, and from EPP we are ready to deliver and we are ready to get to work. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now calling to the floor Mrs. Mendes for SND. You have 1 minute, please.
Thank you. Senhora Presidente, senhores.
Chair, President, Commissioner, it's true that the Pact for Migration and Asylum reached consensus in this House. However, returns is something that still divides us. Some measures are positive, and others I'd like to point out as being negative. And from my point of view, and the point of view of SND, violate our fundamental rights. First of all, the idea of giving the member states the freedom to choose with which third countries they can negotiate the return of their citizens. I think that this is dangerous because it does not go in the light of what Commissioner said of having a common approach to returns, a common policy. Secondly, people are being sent back to third countries that have not ratified any international law instrument, or countries that do not cooperate with different organizations, or governments that are not diplomatically recognized. And I think we need to review this. And finally, Commissioner, I'm almost done. Unaccompanied minors being sent back to third countries is dangerous, and it violates their very basic rights. Commissioner, please do keep that in mind.
Now call Mrs. Ellers for 2 minutes, talking for the Patriots.
Dank u wel, voorzitter.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Commissioner for presenting the new returns proposal. It's not a minute too soon, and I'm to a certain extent positive. The returns policy has been a disaster over the last years. The current policy does not ensure that people are returned, and it is a goldmine for asylum lawyers. 500,000 people get a return decision every year, but 80% of the illegals are not actually returned. This is something which has got completely out of hand. It's like teenagers destroying the sitting room and the parents don't do anything about it. People have got to leave, and that's just common sense. It's not being radical in any way. The Asylum Pact is being used as some kind of silver bullet to solve the problem of asylum. But we can adopt any amount of legislation if we don't have significant increase in the number of returns. It's like leaving the tap open. We need a robust approach vis-à-vis migrants, but also vis-à-vis our own citizens. I want measures against people who don't take back their own citizens. They should not have any visa alleviation or any development aid. We've been laughed at by the entire world for ages. Anybody who's refused should be returned and should not be able to hang around forever going through procedures. They should be able to be sent to other countries and to return hubs out with the EU. I am happy to work constructively with other groups as a representative of the Patriots. And without the Patriots, we won't have a majority for a strong return policy. We'll continue with the silly approach we have at the moment. Let us work towards a strong policy and the safety of our citizens. Thank you.
Voor te komen, u heeft 1 minuut. En u spreekt voor OCR.
1 minute. Chairman, Commissioner, this is a historical situation. We've been waiting for this for a long time. It's essential to take action. Any migration policy which can't return 80% of people who have returned decisions is ridiculous. We can discuss whether it should be 12 weeks or 6 weeks, or whether you should have 2 or 3 legal decisions, but it's just not acceptable and it's not credible. This is the best approach and the best proposal we've seen in this area for 10 years. We need to be positive in looking at it, and I would call on all my colleagues to do the same. We have to move towards a situation where the decisions taken by our migration services can actually be executed. I think the obligation of to cooperate should be brought back to the fore. This is an addition to national instruments, and it is well embedded in our structures. Return hubs in third countries are essential. You can count on us.
Ik vraag nu aan mijn...
Thank you, Sumanani, for Renew. Thank you very much.
Colleagues, after the successful establishment of the Migration Pact, I am pleased that today a new return directive has been presented by the Commission, for which I would like to thank Commissioner Brunner. Without a functioning system on returns, the European migration system will never function properly. At the moment, only 20% of rejected asylum seekers are actually returned. This is unacceptable, and it undermines public support and trust in our migration policies. There is a need for a simple, fast and efficient return directive where mutual recognition of return decisions between member states is essential. And there I see already, with my critical eyes, room for improvement, dear Commissioner. Furthermore, rejected asylum seekers and the countries of origin must be required to cooperate towards the return, and there should be consequences for those who do not. This requires intensive cooperation with these countries, and we need agreements, Mr. Commissioner. And let me be clear, for the Renew Europe Group, it's adamant that human rights are always being taken into account. And from now on, in view of previous lessons learned, it's important that the Parliament takes responsibility and works together, Madam Chair.
Uw tijd is op, sorry.
Your time is up. Ms. Streek, you have a minute.
Commissioner, the EU return system is in dire need of improvement. Only 1 in 5 decisions are followed up. But the proposed return regulation lets them off the hook. It blames and punishes returnees and countries of origin. It gives member states a blank check to dump people in a legal and humanitarian limbo in third countries, without any prospect of a durable solution. So more suffering, migratory movements back to Europe, and millions, if not billions, in wasted taxpayers' money. We had the chance to finally get it right and make returns work by fixing the gaps, enforcing the rules and focusing on durable solutions. But this is just a shameless appeasement of the far right. A Trojan horse that under the false guise of toughness will only lead us further astray.
Thank you. We'll call now Mrs. Gallan, speaking for the left. You have 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Mrs. President. Hello, Mr. Comisario. Lamentablemente.
Unfortunately, today you've proposed this proposal as if it was a great novelty. However, nothing of what you've presented is new. Everything's already been tried and it's failed. And the only novelty is that you've given in to the extremists. You're speaking about returns, but it's a euphemism because what we're speaking about is giving a green light to forced expulsions. We are weakening the European Union's international obligations, and we are not upholding human rights. This is one of the many reasons why this proposal is unacceptable. First of all, it's completely anachronistic. It does not take into account the positive contributions of migrants, nor the 1 million people a year, which the Commission itself has said that we need in Europe in order to keep up our way of life. So why are you going against the interests of the EU? Secondly, it's not operative because we've showed how inefficient and disproportionately expensive it is to expose people instead of granting them their rights. And thirdly, it's cruel because it externalizes human rights violations by creating Guantanamos outside of the EU. I'd like to say more, but I'm out of time.
I wanted to talk. Thank you. We'll now call to the floor Mrs. Can. You have 2 minutes for ESN.
Ja. Seit Jahren versinkt Europa im Migration.
We've had chaos with migrants coming into the continent of Europe for years, and it's become very clear. We've lost control completely. In 2024, over 400,000 foreigners who came to the EU were obliged to leave. They had no right to be here. And we're so skeptical, you were wondering, but Dublin III is a foreign word. It's a different language for a lot of people who don't understand what this means. Solingen, Mannheim, and all sorts of places in Germany are suffering because of the lack of understanding. And instead of protecting people, we've got Frontex, which is the most expensive border agency in the world. They're talking about protecting people and refusing to carry out pushbacks. Now, we have various proposals on the table for returns, but we're just being ridiculed in this Parliament. And we haven't even got an update on the existing legislation. We haven't got anything about deportations. And this is a debate which is leading us to more red tape in Europe. We've got enough of that already. We're just really... if we were serious in this in Europe, we would do something practical in order to stop the influx of these people. But people are afraid. You're afraid to lose your percentages. You're going to lose your votes because you know that since after 29, this will be halved. But if you really want to know, I can tell you what to do. Returns only makes sense in the EU if we have legislation in place. And that means pushbacks and more pushbacks. We need to have deportation centres, reception centres outside the EU so we can put a stop to this. Development aid to countries that do not take back their illegal migrants is also essential. And we could also do something useful with the money that we have for the migration policies in Europe.
I will now call to the floor Mrs. Dupont for 1 minute and a half.
Thanks, Madam President. Commissioner, those who don't have a right to stay in the EU should not be in the EU. As simple, a self-explanatory sentence. Yet only 1 of 5 third-country nationals with a return order is effectively returned. This stretches member states' capacity. It undermines the promise of international protection for those who are in real need of protection. It can have devastating security consequences. Long procedures, shifting responsibilities between authorities, lack of coordination between member states, lack of cooperation by the returnees, lack of cooperation with third countries are the core deficiencies. Yet an effective return policy is an integral part of a fully functioning common asylum and migration system. This is why I very much welcome today's proposal as finally closing the gap, as presenting the missing piece to the pact. It clearly paves the way forward. Mutual recognition and possibilities for common enforcement, obligation to cooperate for returnees and consequences for non-compliance, rules to prevent absconding, stricter rules on security cases, enhanced third-country cooperation. That will equip the member states with a real tool to coordinate, to cooperate, and to increase the numbers of effective and sustainable returns. With that, we will not only react to our citizens' expectation, we will restore trust in a union that can uphold the values and act firm and effective if needed. Colleagues, challenges at this scale need to be met by the democratic forces. We as EPP stand ready. Und ein letzter Satz. Ich freue mich, dass meine Vorrednerin gerade deutlich gemacht hat, dass sie nicht...
I'm glad that the previous speaker made it clear she wasn't going to be part of the negotiations.
Call Mrs. Siepel. You have 1 minute.
Vielen Dank. Die Rückkehr von Ausreise.
Thank you. The return of people who are not permitted to stay, who are obliged to go home, is part of a system of migration which functions well. And I would agree with the Commissioner that we need to be more effective. But that's the only thing I think we agree on in terms of this proposal we have today. We've had a rejection in legal aid, and we've got more and more contradictions to our fundamental rights. Detention periods are longer, sometimes up to 2 years for unaccompanied minors included, and deportation centres in third states without it being clear what the conditions are, if minimum standards are in place. But in spite of these far-reaching ramifications with regard to fundamental rights, the Commission once again has failed to carry out a clear analysis of the repercussions of its proposal. So this all leads quite seamlessly into the narrative of the new Commission under Mrs. von der Leyen that all migrants are criminals and are used as weapons, partly against the EU and described as such. And I will firmly reject this negative, Mr. Brunner. You really need to do some improvements on this proposal.
Une heure et demie, certainement pas 1 minute et demie. Merci.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Chairman. For years now, the European Union has been promising to fight against illegal migration, but unfortunately the reality is not changing. You are now presenting a returns proposal, but is this really firm? There's no mechanism for sanctions against third countries that refuse to take back their citizens who have migrated illegally. There's no Schengen sanctions or any financial or economic pressure. Given that, they're not going to cooperate with us and they leave us without any arms. There's also too much procedure, which reduces the possibility of returning people. They can appeal again and again. And what's even worse is that minors and families are being excluded from this proposal. Without a firm action against them, we'll have more of a pull factor. Is there enough distinction? Is there enough room for us to reduce the returns? There's no bone density tests which are in this proposal either, which leaves a door wide open to people saying they're younger than they are. Brussels says that they want to act, but if they want to act, then they've got to stop cooperating with the people who want to make migratory policy not work. We represent the 20 million people who want to fight against illegal migration. Thank you.
Call to take the floor, Mr. Weimers, for 1 minute, please.
Tack, fru talman.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner Brunner. Let me explain why it is so important that refused migrants are actually returned. If we have a system which works, then we save lives. Patrick Lundström, who was killed in Brussels, would have been alive if his killer had been sent back. And if asylum had not been granted to other killers, they would believe Bergström would be alive if his killer had been sent back to Uzbekistan. The same applies to people who recently died in Munich. We can honor their memory by applying these rules. The returns legislation has to be applied before more people are killed. 80% who have return orders remain in Europe, and that's got to change. We're prepared to contribute. Ms. Keller, for 1 minute.
Madam President, Commissioner Brunner, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the only thing missing from the Asylum and Migration Pact was, in fact, the returns part of it, and I'm delighted, therefore, that we've made progress on something and found a common solution, which is harmonised at European level. But there are a few problems, quite a few problems with this proposal. If I've understood your presentation correctly, Commissioner, mutual recognition of returns is only to be voluntary and not mandatory. It is a terrible pity to deprive ourselves of a common tool while member states can only complain about these very conflicting decisions on returns. Now, with regard to the hubs, return hubs, what's the point of sending migrants to an intermediary country which they have no link with or no resources in? Having agreements with third countries to facilitate the return of their citizens or nationals, sure, but sending people who are not connected in any way does not reflect our European values, and therefore an innovative solution has already been found. Let me repeat, it's the Asylum and Migration Pact. Now let's just make sure it is implemented correctly before we look for simplistic and populist solutions. Thank you.
To take the floor, Mr. Orlando, for 1 minute, please.
Signora Presidente.
President, Commissioner, the text proposed requires careful attention when it comes to respecting the human rights of migrants, and it doesn't look at reality. After the failed agreement between Rwanda and the UK, now we want to expel people to third countries that do not uphold or guarantee their human rights, and we take no account of any links the migrant may have with a third country. We haven't even foreseen the return of the migrant to the country of origin. And of course, there's another failed attempt after UK, Rwanda. There's a new protocol between Italy and Albania, which has become an example of inefficiency, a waste of resources. It's been denounced by the Republic, and it's a violation of human rights, which has been condemned by Italian courts. So this Pontius Pilate approach does not seem worthy of the EU, and I think that the EU should uphold the humanness of these human beings. Thank you, Commissioner.
I will now call to take the floor Mr. Mazurek. You have 1 minute, please.
Commissioner Brunner, are you against migrants? Do you ask them if they're running away from hunger or war? Would you be willing to stare them in the eye and say that the only thing you can offer them is a policy of having them live illegally and afraid of being deported, and a complete violation of the human rights, including the right of asylum? This is a racist approach from the far right, which gives far right governments the legal backing they were lacking thus far. It systematically sends back people who are undocumented, and it forcibly removes people to third countries where they've never been and where they have no links. You are legalizing the detention and expulsion of minors, including unaccompanied minors, and you claim to be saving them by sending them to these unknown third countries. This policy will lead migrant people to hide from those who are pursuing them. And there are many alternatives that the Commissioner did not even wish to look at.
You have a blue card from Mrs. Mendes. Do you wish to take it, Mrs. Mendes?
Thank you, President. Mr. João Oliveira, I agree with you, but I wanted to ask the following. Do you feel, yes or no, that this regulation tramples on the Charter of Fundamental Rights Charter? It's in Portugal, for example, citizens are held for 72 hours and they can appeal. Do you think that that is this or is this not a blatant trampling of the fundamental rights of these individuals? Mrs. Mendes, obviously this goes against their fundamental rights. This is a proposal which blatantly violates the fundamental rights of migrants, and it accepts for minors to be detained, which has been done thus far, but now it's legalized. So, yes, I have to agree with you. In Portugal, this is already happening because when the Portuguese government wanted to speak about the Migration Pact, they were trying to improve the lives of undocumented migrants. And now, your time is up.
I will call Mr. Mazurek to take the floor. You have 1 minute. Please respect your time, and a lot of people want to take it.
Europe really does not need migration. What really Europe needs now is remigration, to get rid of all the illegal migrants who, contrary to the laws of our countries, have entered our territory, to get rid of all the criminals, thieves, terrorists who are killing the people in Western Europe. Not even a week passes nowadays where we don't get the news that some sadistic murder killed a person by stabbing every single day almost we hear these terrible stories about children and women being harmed by these criminals who should have been long deported from our territory. Europe is fighting against a huge increase of migration and criminality and extremism, and we just simply need to get rid of these people. They have no place here. We need to deport them just like Trump has started doing in America. I really don't understand how some progressive leftists from this hemicycle can justify criminals, and apparently we're trying to stamp on their fundamental rights when we want to deport them. I really don't think so. I think they should leave right now, all of them.
Mrs. Benova, you have 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much, colleagues, Mr. Commissioner. The current migration policy of the EU has been dysfunctional for some time already, and what we are now saying, or what you are coming up with, we already had these proposals in 2015, later on in 2018, and I keep my fingers crossed for you to finally make it happen. In spite of the fact that the member states are issuing return decisions, only 25% of migrants are actually returning, and from that number, part of that is coming back. May I further emphasize that the solidarity mechanism of the EU has been turned down by several EU countries, and the mechanism is moreover unjust because it doesn't reflect the enormous burden by some countries such as Slovakia, Poland, Hungary, which have already accepted millions of Ukrainians. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico has been drawing attention to this for 10 years already, and he is calling for the redrafting of this migration policy, and we keep our fingers crossed to make it happen. Thank you.
Mr. Zarzaleros, you have 1 minute and a half, please.
Gracias, señora.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, this is a good proposal. And it's a good proposal, first of all, because this is a regulation, not a directive. And when we're trying to unify and harmonize our migration policies, in this case, our approach on returns, that's essential. And also because we agree with the approach of this proposal. Clearer obligations for people who need to be repatriated, facilitating and promoting voluntary returns, better coordination, and this is definitely a proposal which will be which make life harder for mafias. But we need to remain ambitious, and of course, mandatory return orders should be kept as a tool for the Commission and for this Parliament. This Parliament was specifically dedicated to upholding the fundamental rights of migrants during the Migration and Asylum Pact. We can discuss this proposal, but we cannot simply throw it out the window by saying that they are not upholding their rights, including the rights of unaccompanied minors. We are very concerned about the role the Commission plays with third countries. This will be key for the success of this and also for the role of the Commission in making possible the application of this regulation. This is not business as usual. This is not routine. This is a challenge that affects all of us and all institutions of the Union. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Laurent for 1 minute, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Monsieur le Commissaire, chers collègues.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner, dear colleagues. A directive becoming a regulation isn't always a good thing, particularly when it comes to fundamental rights. The return regulation has been launched with its somewhat worrying and doubtful measures, which need to take into account the budget context and the geopolitical context, which is fragile. We're talking about return hubs, forced departures, and even for minors who could be held for 2 years, even though they may not have committed a crime. We are not going to be deceived by any of this. There's one aim of this, and that's to increase the number of people being expelled. However, the figures for those arriving are falling. Our group yesterday, like NGOs, expressed their categorical opposition to this text. We want an overall comprehensive approach to migration policy, not a unilateral approach. Thank you.
The next speaker is Mr. Tangier Correa for 1 minute, please.
Senhora Presidente, Senhor Comissário, em primeiro lugar, em minha casa entra quem eu convido. Em segundo lugar, a minha casa é lugar registrado.
Well, first of all, I simply wanted to say that my house is a place that I invite people that I want to come to, and that is regulated by legislation, by Schengen, and if they come with my permission, then they have to return to their home. That is a first step, my friends. Those are first steps, but very important ones indeed, because sovereignty, national sovereignty, and security have been seriously affected. For the last 2.5 years, actually 2.5 years ago, my country was a safe place, but it no longer is. In human rights terms, this issue is extremely serious because Portuguese citizens as well have human rights. Why are we forgetting the human rights of European citizens in our own countries? In Portugal, for example, and we're worried about the human rights of others, but those people who come to our house without even being invited.
Mes chers collègues,
Honourable members, Commissioner Brunner, for decades, Europe has been living with crises and emergencies. Illegal migration is rising. We've seen shortcomings in current legislation and migration rules. And so 80% of expulsion orders handed down by judges are not enforced. We need to be firm, extremely firm. We should get rid of the distinction between safe and unsafe countries. Let us remember that those that are not safe are the migrants. We need to look at trade agreements and link them to automatic readmission. We need to increase detention periods, ensure they are detained until they are effectively expelled. We need to get rid of the scandal of false or fake minors. We need the right legal tools to protect our citizens. Those that illegally enter Europe need to face one certainty, that eventually they'll be deported from our territory.
Minute, please.
Frau Präsidentin, verehrte Kolleginnen und Kollegen, sehr geehrter Herr Kommissar.
Colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, the return is part of the Migration Pact, and I think it's very important for us to have a paper on the table right now with regard to this particular issue. It's already been discussed, and I would like to emphasize that for a state under the rule of law, we have proper asylum procedures, and part of that also is the consequences that those who are rejected must follow. In other words, being sent back. In Germany, things are not going too well, and in a number of other places as well. So, as far as the harmonization of standards, we'll have the Migration Pact. We need more unity. We need some sort of single system in place that we all follow. And, of course, this uniformity also has to exist as far as returns are concerned. And it must be consistent as well, that we have mutual recognition of the decisions of the various member states. Migration between the member states is a problem as well. That's something we have to recognize. And that's why we need a harmonized system and a system that is recognized mutually, and thus returns can be conducted in a consistent, effective fashion. Thank you.
We have a long agenda, and we have a very long speakers list, not just for this debate, but also for the coming one. So please stick to your speaking time. And the next speaker will be Mr. Karem for 1 minute, please.
Monsieur le Commissaire,
Commissioner, the extreme right, well, is something that you've created in 2004. What was revealed about the AfD brought 1 million Germans into the streets. Now, when everybody's looking at rearming Europe, you're giving us a draft regulation which is no less than the materialization of a xenophobic approach leading to deportations. It has very hard provisions when it comes to returns, and it's strengthened by inhuman proposals as well. This week, we were talking, our European leaders were talking about European values in the light of what Trump was saying. Well, what values are we talking about? Violating the fundamental rights of the most vulnerable, forced deportations of people who are fleeing war and misery. And then we are deporting them to people who we say are safe, but are they really? What is happening with our European values? With Dublin and the Migration Pact, the European Union's policy on migration essentially is the same as Donald Trump's.
The next speaker is Mr. Linares for 1.5 minutes, please.
Ja, dank u, voorzitter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Europe is a safe haven for refugees fleeing warfare. That is only possible if we are clear about how we deal with those people who are safe in their home country. There are hundreds of thousands each year that have been ordered to return to their home countries. They are flouting our laws, and that breaches our rule of law and the contract with society, and takes away from resources for those people that genuinely need it. It is vital that the Commission has now come forward with an ambitious proposal. I'm delighted that Commissioner Brunner has listened to our calls and come forward with a returns regulation within the first 100 days of the new Commission. We need to make it clear that one of our top priorities in the current term is to make it clear that we've heard what voters are saying. We need a single European system. We need strict rules to simplify the procedures, clear rules on returns, and a no-nonsense policy for those that endanger public safety. We need to ensure that there is less illegal migration. We now have a proposal in front of us. The European Parliament faces a huge responsibility to do its part. We cannot drag out discussions endlessly. We need to get down to brass tacks and deal with this.
Yes, Ms. Strada for 1 minute, please.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Dear Commissioner, dear colleagues, this regulation has a number of dangerous aspects. It talks about repatriating people to third countries who are supposed to respect their rights. But what about if you've signed the International Charter on Human Rights? What happens to these people who go to third countries? Nobody knows, and there's no obligation for transparency regarding these agreements with third countries. Once again, if you're found on European soil without valid documents, you can be held for 2 years. Before it was 18 months. And of course, the longer the period is, the less likely one is to be repatriated. But that's another issue. When it comes to children, well, children shouldn't really be detained like this. It should be the final option, but it's not the final option, because we're going to be locking up children who haven't committed any offence. So I think, Commissioner, we often hear that a European Union's approach should be firm but fair. We've seen a lot of firmness here, but not very much fairness.
There's a blue card, Ms. Strada. There's a blue card from Ms. Galland from the left. Do you want to take it? Yeah. Sorry. Please.
Señora Estrada, desde su experiencia.
1 second, I think she needs to have... There it is.
Señora Estrada, desde su profunda experiencia...
Given your experience on migration and rescue at sea, what do you think? Do you think that regulation will continue to prolong the persecution of those that don't have documents because they could not find any safe legal routes to arrive in Europe via legal pathways. Based on your experience, would you not say that the only thing we're doing here is breaching international law and further undermining these rights? Thank you.
Only 30 seconds, please.
Thank you very much. In my experience and in that of academics who have been studying the data for years, the only way to prevent illegal migration, i.e. people moving around without valid documents, is to have legal channels which are safe for people to travel. These are people who, what people who study this subject tell us about it. It's the closed borders that forces people into people smugglers' hands. We need to open the borders, and what we've heard from academics is that people are moving to Europe because there's a pull factor. There's a need for labour.
Next speaker is Mr. Buxade Villalba for 1 minute, please.
Gracias, Presidente. Thank you very much, Presidente. Habib Rahman, who's from Afghanistan, whose asylum application was rejected. He killed somebody in Saxony. This individual is out right now. Organizations that help these migrants, they make these particular administrative procedures which have no end even more complicated. So deportation also has to take into consideration, of course, the result of an asylum procedure. If it is rejected, the individual has to be sent away, and the individual has to be incarcerated, held in detention until that moment comes to be deported to a third country. It is only thus that we can move forward so that people understand that we have rights, we have laws, so that Europeans understand that and foreigners understand that as well. As far as the guarantee mechanism, I think it's quite clear that the various visa systems and the trade agreements, they ought to be suspended immediately if a third country does not accept returns. We need some sort of order and structure for these particular regulations to work. Nothing of this nature is in the proposal of the Commission, which leaves us in this horrific state of confusion and chaos. Thank you.
Is Ms. Wisniewska for 1 minute, please.
Dziękuję bardzo, Pani Przewodnicząca, Panie Komisarzu. Thank you, Madam President. Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, Germany's policies, the open door policy and lack of an effective returns policy has led to appalling, bloody crimes committed around Germany by migrants who were not deported. We hear figures of 1.5 million, but there are far more migrants who have not been deported. Only 1 in 4 deportation orders is enforced, according to Eurostat. So we clearly need a strong returns policy, an immediate deportation of illegal migrants. Otherwise, no trade cooperation. Indeed, any cooperation with third countries should depend on them recognising and allowing for readmission. We need to look at hubs outside the European Union for those that are not entitled to stay in the European Union. Thank you.
Reisler for 1.5 minutes, please.
Gotovo 500 milijuna ljudi svake godine dobije odluku da napuste europski teritorij. No samo jedan...
Thank you. Only 1 in 5 who are told to leave actually leaves European Union territory. Having a model which is so ineffective, I think, reduces the trust that the European citizens have in the system, and it attracts illegal migrants, and this leads to tragic accidents as well. We can't ignore the dangers of these kinds of policies. Without proper returns policy, then the asylum system doesn't make sense at all, and that's why the decision to deport or not to approve somebody's asylum request is valid if we want the rule of law and if we want the rules taken within the European Union, or adopted within the European Union, to be taken seriously. And the introduction of harder rules and also of holding centres outside the European Union is in the new Pact for Migration and Asylum, and that should lead to greater order in the European Union, and we should have this as a priority, because without an effective migratory policy which has a proper returns policy, I don't think that Europe is credible.
Den næste taler er hr. Vistesen for 1 minut. Værsgo.
In September, a 19-year-old girl was found raped and murdered in Paris. In January, a 2-year-old boy was stabbed to death in a city park near Frankfurt. In February, in Munich, a 2-year-old girl and her mom was killed by a car terrorist. What does these events have in common? Every one of them, and 100 more, was committed by illegal migrants who have arrived illegally to this continent, been denied asylum, and not been deported. Time and time again, we have warned about the dangers of illegal migration. And time again, we have been dismissed, ignored, and vilified. How many more Europeans must die, be raped, robbed, or attacked before you wake up? How many more grieving families must be left behind in sorrow and despair before we take this serious? For every victim, every shattered family, we must say naive policies cost lives.
Tak. The next speaker is Mr. Tynkkynen for 1 minute, please.
Arvoisa
President, every year, more than 300,000 foreigners who are illegally residing in the EU are ordered to leave. Yet only about a fifth of them are returned to their country of origin. This return system is just one big joke. Europe prides itself on the rule of law and the respect for it. Good. But what is the principle that does not allow the return of illegal immigrants? Enhancing the effectiveness of returns is also a security issue. Migrants from especially African and Middle Eastern countries are clearly overrepresented in crime statistics. When will Europe wake up? Those who have received a negative decisions and those who have committed serious crimes must be returned immediately. Development aid must be made conditional on countries agreeing to take in their own citizens. Return centres must be located outside the EU. Dear colleagues, let's make this a year of returns.
Thank you. Next speaker is Ms. Fosenberg Rionidi for 1.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, President. Commissioner, we welcome the proposal for the new regulation. It is a necessary addition for the asylum and migration package. We have had serious threats against the safety of our citizens and violation of returns for those that don't have the right to stay in Europe. But the policy of returns is not only the responsibility of Europe, it requires cooperation with the countries of origin. And I would like to remind you of the joint agreement with Turkey concerning returns, which is in place since 2016, has not been implemented by Turkey. So it's absolutely necessary for us to emphasize that the third countries, the sources and the origins of these individuals, from this point onward, will be subject to certain penalties and sanctions if they do not cooperate. I think it's necessary mutual recognition of the issue of return by the member state and, of course, by the place of origin as well. For this legislation to function effectively, that is necessary. Otherwise, we'll end up with a policy which cannot be implemented once again. So we have to, furthermore, I feel, beef up Frontex. Only a joint European system with the active participation of all member states can protect the Schengen area from secondary movement as well. Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Mr. Deutsch for 1 minute, please.
Brüsszel miatt Európát ellepték a migránsok.
It is
kell beengedni Európába. És lássunk csodát, 9 év alatt 9 millió.
And what we're seeing now in over a few years is millions of money being paid. If we think about what happened with the Soros Foundation as well, and then we've got this terrible pact on migration, which will lead to further clandestine migration, and it punishes member states that want to defend themselves. But my country wants to defend borders. It wants to defend people, those that want to have a safe life in Europe. So I think the moment has come to take back control from Brussels. We shouldn't be seeing migrants entering the European Union illegally, and the returns policy should be properly applied. And we should also prevent people from coming from outside our borders, and when they do come, they should be repatriated. Thank you.
Grazie Presidente. Finalmente la linea.
Thank you, President. The line of the Italian government on clandestine migration has become the line followed by all of the European Union. We're finally talking about stopping people from leaving in the first place through bilateral agreements with countries to the south of the Mediterranean. Because they don't have the right to seek asylum here. And this is something that we've been saying for some time now. And we need a proper European returns rule in conjunction with cooperation with third countries. Some are talking about deportation, but what we're doing is defending the borders of the European Union and of Italy, as we said that we would to Italian electors, and as we will continue to do in the future. And this is true also at the European Union level, because we've achieved something that we've been talking about for some time. Not just a drop of some 75% in the number of people trying to cross the Mediterranean, but also a significant drop in the number of deaths. Thank you.
Speaker is Mr. Suido Alvarez for 1 minute, please.
Gracias, Presidenta. Thank you very much, President. Commissioner, years we've been building a new migration policy. The Migration and Asylum Pact kept us busy for long afternoons, mornings, and evenings. But the new legislation on return was what was missing. This is absolutely key. And a number of people have said it today, that every time we have a return order for irregular migrants, only 1 in 5 actually ends up leaving Europe. So we need to accelerate immediately these particular returns. And we have to do that before the most extreme cases may have terrible consequences for our society. And that's why, with great positivity, we look upon what has been emphasized in the returns here by the Commission. We need a legal framework. In cases where the order is not executed. We need prohibition for re-entry, and we need to make it absolutely clear that we need cooperation for readmission with transit countries and third countries as well, and countries of origin. The system will not be complete unless we have an integrated system involving all of these factors. Let's begin to work, ladies and gentlemen.
Speaker is Ms. Brülker for 1 minute, please.
Dziękuję Pani Przewodnicząca, Panie Komisarzu.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. Germany's warm welcome migration policy has been an absolute disaster for all of Europe. We are seeing it bankrupt. Millions of European citizens feel unsafe on the streets of their own cities. What Europe needs today is a mass deportation programme. It is time to put an end to the open door policy. All illegal, irregular immigrants are criminals. We are just exacerbating the problem and creating incentives for millions more to arrive. Germany brought this problem on itself and is trying to dump it on other nations and lowering the level of cooperation and trust in the Schengen zone. It is time for decisive action to stop illegal immigration, to deport criminals from our continent. It is time to fully implement the Budapest Patriots Declaration. Only this way can we save Europe. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry. And then we move on to the next speaker, which is Mr. Brudzinski for 1 minute, please.
Dziękuję, Pani Przewodnicząca, Panie Komisarzu. Szanowni Państwo.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, just to begin, I have some data for you. According to Eurostat, about a third of those who have received an order to leave the European Union territory have actually been deported to a third country. Between 2014 and 2023, the member states of the European Union spent issued 4.5 million orders for people to leave, and only a third of these were actually followed up on. So you can ask yourself, I think, where these millions of irregular migrants come from. Why are they here in the European Union? Would it not be because of a foolish policy on the part of Angela Merkel with a Herzwilken policy? Or I think it's high time to say that we need to say sorry to the Polish customs officers who defended the European Union against these inflows of people from outside the country. And other people were saying, well, let them in and then we'll see who they are. And you've seen what's happened in European towns and cities. We need to stop this foolish policy now.
Brudzinski, there is a blue card. Do you want to take it?
Już idiotycznych.
Good. Thank you.
I've had enough of foolish questions.
The next speaker is Mr. Cunha for 1 minute, please.
Senhora Presidente, Senhor Comissário,
President, Commissioner, returns are necessary to ensure an effective migration policy. Where returns are not possible, or we need to apply strict conditions. The only way to tackle illegal migration is to have an effective return strategy. We need a rapid, uniform and clear European response on returns. In Schengen, we would like to see rules implemented and enforced. We need to focus on two key principles. Firstly, effective monitoring of migrants from the point of arrival through until a decision is made. And secondly, that procedural period must be kept short. We need to respect rules, ensure dignified treatment of migrants, full respect for their human rights and European law. We need returns, but we also need a humane and proportionate response here. Thank you.
To speaking time. The next speaker is Ms. Latinopoulou for 1.5 minutes, please.
Commissioner, illegal immigration is a well-orchestrated business for the orchestrators to make a fortune and to Islamize Europe. You have filled our countries with illegal migrants with the blessing of Germany and France. We pay Islam that hates us out of our savings to turn our cities into ghettos, to rape and to murder before our eyes in the name of Allah. We are filled with Mohammed and Mahmoud in a Europe that has become unrecognizable. There are solutions. Strengthen by all means the countries that are the first entry points, such as Greece, Italy, and Spain. Those who enter European territory illegally, they should receive no benefits, they should receive no asylum. They should be arrested, they should have their mobile phones confiscated, they should be taken to uninhabited islands, and then they should be deported to their country or countries outside of the European Union. Stop subsidizing their accommodation and subsidize their deportation. Our guiding light ought to be the policies of Hungary and of and Poland, it's quite clear that those who violate our borders are entering their unwanted guests, and they're destroying our countries. So begin mass deportations immediately. Money exists. Airports exist. Detention centers are there. Kick them out before Europe dies. We want our countries, our identity, and our values. And if you so-called sensitive socialists, well, why don't you look at yourselves? Because you are the biggest racists against Europeans.
Okay.
You're not obliged to do so. Mr. Sieper?
Intervention?
Just a moment.
It was Mr. Sieper.
Oh.
Yes.
But I also pushed.
Yeah. 2 blue cards?
You only get 1.
Okay. Who is it?
Thank you. Hi, here. For it. Here, over here, on the top.
Okay.
Thank you for taking the blue card, colleague. I'm just wondering, because I'm hearing the phrase Germany a lot here. As a German, I want to ask you, don't you think that the times where we put people in camps in Europe should be over? And don't you think that we can have better solutions to the problems that indeed rise with illegal immigration than putting people in camps, locking them away, taking their phones, taking their liberty, and taking their rights? And you law think that is a shame indeed.
Mr. Latinopoulos?
You ought to be ashamed of yourself to confuse these things. You ought to be ashamed. That pseudo-dilemma that you're presenting is shameful. It's shameful, the fact that you even mention it. No relation between one and the other. But if somebody enters your house illegally, goes to prison, and we're speaking about closed detention facilities, where they would go to be returned home. The fact that you made that particular comparison is shameful. It has nothing to do with anything that we're talking about right now. The speaker has been cut off.
Colleagues, please, calm. Next speaker is Mr. Wawrzykiewicz for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Madam President, Mr. Commissioner, Minister, colleagues. It seems to be quite obvious that we have to take a decisive step to fix the EU broken return system. This is the time. The new regulation needs to deliver effective, fast and coordinated returns. Like my colleague Lena Dupont pointed out today, those who are not entitled to stay on the EU territory should be returned. As simple as that. As expressed by Mr. Commissioner, those who pose a threat should be returned, should be removed. I would add that prioritizing the returns of those who pose the threat to our common security is key. Improving the effectiveness and sustainability of the returns is one of the priorities of Polish presidency. Poland is supporting innovative solutions, including the concept of return hubs. But let's be clear, efficiency cannot mean turning a blind eye to human rights and dignity. Let's be effective, but never forget our identity. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Besok for 1 minute, please.
Thank you for the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, the European Commission has proposed another very ambitious plan to tackle returns of illegal migrants. It promises greater pressure on third countries, more effectiveness. But let's ask ourselves, what will happen if the countries that should take these people back refuse to cooperate? The answer is simple: nothing at all. This proposal contains no automatic sanctions for countries who do not respect readmissions. The Commission talks about a more strict visa policy or restricted trade relations, but where are the obligations to do this? Where is a mechanism that ensures that countries who do not wish to cooperate will feel what it means to not cooperate. It's nowhere to be seen. Again, this is yet another proposal just on paper with no practical effect. The European Commission had a unique opportunity to come up with a very hard, easily enforceable system of sanctions. Instead, we have yet another circumnavigable plan, and that's when we wonder why things never work. If the proposal stays the way it is, it's not a solution, it's another opportunity wasted. Thanks.
Ms. Pedro, for 1 minute, please.
Senhor Comissário, uma política migratória justa.
Commissioner, a credible and fair migratory policy depends on two pillars. We have to welcome those that need protection and make sure that those who don't require protection go back to their own countries. And those that fall through the legal gaps are prey to exploitation, and that's neither good for them nor for the citizens of Europe. The institutions, I think, are losing in credibility here. What we know is that in these kinds of situations, the extremes can profit from our difficulties in dealing with this. We need to have proper coordination. We can't have a proper regulation without the right kind of rules for it, because if we don't have the right kind of order, then we can't show solidarity. We need the right kind of balance that we need.
Steger for 1 minute, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, since 2015, over 8 million migrants have come to Europe. 230 of those who come are not really, they're not here to be protected. They cannot be protected under legislation, so they have to go back. Those people who come and step their foot on European soil, they end up staying in Europe. And that's why we, unfortunately, this returns regulation won't change anything. The fact that they can step their foot on Europe is enough. So it's good that we're finally having some sort of system of deportation in place. But the fact is that things are already way over the top, and nothing will happen. Third countries are not cooperating, and this is something which has repeatedly over the years failed. So we are not ready, really, to undertake some sort of policy that will lead to some sort of proper result on this particular front. We have to make it clear that the procedures that are to take place ought not take place in the EU, they ought to take place outside of the EU. It's been said over and over, but that hasn't happened. Unfortunately, we have a toothless migration policy, which has created a totally out-of-control situation. Thank you.
Mr. Mandel, for 1 minute, please.
President, Commissioner, honourable members, often I have stood here and criticised over-regulation, the fact that the EU cannot tackle illegal migration. Now we have a European Commission that has acted swiftly. Yesterday, we discussed simplification, cutting down on red tape on the basis of an excellent proposal from the Commission. Today, we now have a proposal dealing with returns. 1 in 5 that are not entitled to stay do not leave. So this is something that we can tackle. If the European Parliament plays its part, we can ensure that those that deserve and need asylum are offered shelter in the European Union. However, many of those that come here are not entitled to asylum, and we can act more swiftly to deport them. Marcus Brunner, the Commissioner, has my full support.
The next speaker is Ms. Bartusek for 1 minute, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, Commission, the empathy towards these harmful people, that's European policy in a nutshell. In 2022, more than 500,000 people received a decision on a return, but only a fraction of those were also returned. All the others illegally remained in Europe. While we're hearing from the Commission and other politicians the stories about the Migratory Pact protecting us, there are attacks all over Europe. Solingen, Brussels, Munich, Berlin. That's just a handful of cases where an unsuccessful asylum seeker was supposed to be returned but ignored the order. I worked for 15 years on returning illegals to their countries of origins, and as such I know that we have to be really hard in enforcing our legislation. A new stricter returns policy has been lacking for years now. We have to send a very clear message: don't come to Europe illegally, you will be returned. In the new proposal on returns, what is absent is the pressure we need to exert on third countries. The European Union has to force third countries to re-accept their own citizens. They need to re-accept their own citizens.
Speaker is Mr. Sidekovsky for 1 minute, please.
Thank you for the floor, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Commissioner. 4.5 million orders to leave EU territory and only 20% success rate. Yes, this is the system that makes us risk the trust of our own citizens. And the new proposal offers a change, a unified system with real consequences for those who ignore our laws. Return hubs in third countries are the cornerstone of this proposal. It is a quick, effective, humane solution to ensure that those who do not have the right to be here will not just disappear somewhere. But this is not the end. We have to continue reforming to increase border control, have a strong Frontex, effective cross-border cooperation, and we have to have a system that will be really effective, and we have to finalize that in the next proposal. Thank you.
The next speaker is Mr. Van den Driese for 1 minute, please.
Honourable members, the European Union has failed completely with its migration policy. Our borders are wide open. We see increasing illegal migration. Returns procedures are inefficient and far too lax when it comes to enforcement. Only 1 in 5 are effectively returned. Countries of origin at the same time receive billions from the European Union but refuse to accept their illegal citizens. This is absurd, naive and unsustainable. What Europe needs is mass returns and a requirement on the country of origin to allow readmission. We need to put an end to abuse of the asylum procedure. Countries that do not accept illegal citizens must bear the consequences. No money, no visas, no trade. Europe must ensure a robust migration policy that protects our prosperity, our borders. Unfortunately, that is not the purpose of the European Union.
Here is Mr. Sienkiewicz for 1 minute, please.
Mr. Commissioner, skuteczność systemu zaproponowana przez
Commissioner, the effectiveness of the system being put forward in for returns depends very much on the number of, the kinds of checks which are to be carried out. People can appeal, but they are to be kept under physical or electronic controls or checks. Without that, the whole of the system is pointless. And there are 2 essential aspects here with this, and that's the mutual recognition of decisions being taken and prohibition on being able to enter the European Union as one might wish without papers. So I think that we need to follow up on this. If you decide administratively that somebody has to leave a particular country, then that state has to follow through with that. The European Union has to take back control of its area, otherwise it will just become a motorway for irregular migration.
We have come to catch the eye. I have 17 requests, and we don't have time to take all of you. So I do apologize for that already in advance. I've decided to give the floor to a balance between the groups, also on the sizes of the groups, and based on presence during the debate, and finally when you ask for catch the eye. And I do apologize for those of you who will not be able to speak here today. So the first speaker is Mr. Smith, seat 671, please.
Voorzitter, dank u wel. Commissaris.
Thank you, Commissioner. Finally, Europe is taking control of its own borders. Strict returns and possible return hubs outside the European Union, a step in the right direction. But let's be honest, it is just a beginning. What we really need is an effective return system that ensures that returns effectively take place. We need better cooperation with countries of origin. Any country that refuses readmission of citizens, they must feel the consequences. And that needs to be the uniform approach across all EU member states. We need to be tough. We need binding requirements that safe third countries take on illegal migrants being deported. Commissioner, I wish you every success. It is vital that we ensure returns and protect our borders.
Seat 677, please.
Tack, fru talman. Migrationspolitikens långsiktiga legitimitet förutsätter.
I think it's important that we have a migratory policy which is legitimate. We need to understand that, everybody needs to understand that no means no. 1 out of 5 who have been told to leave the European Union area have actually respected that. And we need to take steps. And the countries who don't want to readmit their nationals should be subject to penalties or sanctions. So we welcome the proposal, but I think we need to go further. We need to make sure that from the outset, those that are here without the correct papers, well, they shouldn't actually be able to get here at all. And that's where the system needs to change. We need stronger returns legislation than we have now, because the migration system has to be filled out further.
Seat 379, please.
Madam President, Commissario Brunner,
Commissioner Brunner, regulation of return. You've heard a lot of criticism that you ought to hear, because a regulation creates obligations for the member states, and it doesn't have to do with simply creating some sort of margin for maneuver. We have an issue where we have a threat for our security right now, but for these returns to be possible, we need an architecture of returns, a system involving transit countries, origin countries, and of course us. And secondly, detention centers in third countries are simply an unimaginable solution, and they exist right now in third countries which have nothing to do with this entire issue. There's no sense in modifying the third country safe havens, because it simply offers the opportunity to undermine the policy that's been adopted. Thank you.
The next speaker is Ms. Sadone, seat 700.
Incredibile.
It's incredible. At last, the European Commission has woken up. Well, better late than never, you could say. After years of empty words about this, well, it seems that the strategy on returns is changing. And what we're saying is that we need to try and stop clandestine migration. I think an enormous mea culpa is due. In Italy, we've been trying to stop the boats from offloading people and trying to prevent tragedies in the sea. But when we were doing what we could in the ports, you were asleep. For 6 years now, we've had this piece of legislation blocked. And the reason, and what we've got now, actually, doesn't go far enough, because there are no sanctions for those countries that don't take back their nationals which are illegally residing in the European Union. We need to do something, otherwise we're going to end up with another failure in this. Thank you.
The next speaker is Mr. Giardi, seat 275, please.
Over the last couple of years, we've become the witnesses of increased migration, which is threatening cohesion of Europe. Our cultural model and our model of open borders as well has failed. They have sunk Europe altogether. Millions of Europeans live in fear that their safety and security is being undermined. Greater control is necessary on the borders. It was those progressive forces that undermined the system that was in place. They never understood what the problem was. With returns only at 20%, my country, Cyprus, it's about 10% actually. And asylum, a system has to be in place, an integrated system which will deter this movement of people to Europe. We have to begin immediately with deportations, stop any support for these individuals, and nobody ought to enter illegally into Europe in the end. Thank you.
Next speaker is Ms. Voutmans, seat 190, please.
Thank you,
President. Honourable members, Mr. Brunner, this is an extremely important proposal that we are discussing here this afternoon. It was the missing piece of the puzzle. You said that yourself. We need to ensure that if an applicant is ordered to leave the European Union, they are effectively deported. That is necessary. We as Liberals are in favour of a strict but fair asylum procedure, and you need swift returns. However, colleagues, allow me to criticise the lies and stigmatising speech of the far right here in this chamber. Can I ask those on this side, look in the mirror. If you were born in a country at war under heavy bombardment, what would you do? It is fortunate for you that you were born in Europe in a country at peace.
Last speaker in Catch the Eye will be Ms. Demirel, seat 300, please.
Thank you very much, President. Commissioner, with your populist proposal for deportation orders, you've sent out one signal. Europe will deport quicker and in a more relentless fashion. You don't even have a plan how that's going to actually take place. Commissioner, you are going to trample upon human rights with this. And you don't even have a list of third countries that you want to propose to us, but you appear very, very sure about yourself that that autocrats in the world will work together with you on this particular front. I find it really terrible, gentlemen, that that people have pointed at you in the course of this debate and pointed out many different things. The issue of migration, do something about it. Do something so that people don't have to leave their country. Do something so that the European Union does not send weapons to other countries. Do something about climate change. Do something so that people don't have to flee for their lives. Do something so that Europe can contribute on that particular front. Do something really if you want to improve the situation.
Just to be very transparent, there is a couple of groups who did not get speaking time, but that was because I had no indications on people wanting to take the floor during Catch the Eye. And finally, we will now give the floor back to the Commission and Commissioner Brunner for trying to wrap up this discussion. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen. Frau Demirel, ich würde Ihnen natürlich auch gerne die Hand schütteln, wenn Sie Ich kann nachher gerne.
I can shake your hand too, if you like. I'll come over to you later and do so. It's very important and quite right that we are here and that we respect human rights. We keep an eye on human rights.
And swap to the whole discussion maybe we were facing this afternoon. I listened, of course, very carefully to the discussion, and thank you to all the speakers of this afternoon. For me, the clearest message actually is that the European Union needs a migration and asylum policy that is, I would say, 100% credible. That is important, and that's what we try to deliver. The pact has laid down a strong foundation, and of course that has to be implemented now. That's the basis we have, but as a lot of you said, of course, there was this missing piece we are talking about today. And I think EU citizens expect us to complete the whole picture and have this comprehensive approach also. This whole picture has to be completed. They want to know that the system operates efficiently. That is, I think, very important, so that we are able to properly integrate all migrants who do have a right to stay, of course. For migrants with no right to stay, they want them to be treated fairly, yes, but firmly, as you rightly mentioned. And they want to know that dangerous individuals with no right to be in the European Union will not pose a threat at the end of the day for all of us. They are not anti-migration, but they want migration that is legal and targeted at our labor market's needs also. And at this stage, they are no longer asking us, actually. They are demanding that we act. It's up to us, I think, to listen carefully, to assume our responsibilities also, and also to finish building the common European migration system we promise, 100% of it, actually. And I'm looking very much forward to discussing all the topics in a constructive way in the next weeks to come to bring these rules into effect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And the debate is closed. We will move on to the next item on the agenda, that is the Council and Commission statements, White Paper on the Future of European Defence. And I will start by giving the floor to the Council and Minister Slapka. Please, the floor is yours.